you so much. All right, let me pull up these slides. All right. And I'm going to set up my timer here. Perfect. So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be speaking today. I'm going to start with Bad Apple. I know that we're a little bit behind time right now, so I'm going to try and go through this as quick as possible. So I'm going to be talking fast. But please, if there's anything that I go over too quickly, don't hesitate to ask questions at the end, and I will happily answer them or go more in depth. So first, let's talk about Bad Apple. That'll be the first thing I'm going to talk about. I'm actually going to be giving two kind of mini presentations here. So yeah, as Lisa mentioned, Bad Apple provides valuable tools and resources with the aim of holding law enforcement accountable and putting an end to police misconduct. What does that actually mean? Well, first, let's talk about how Bad Apple started. Bad Apple was founded in December of 2020 at Aaron Swartz Day 2 years ago. So this is actually the first time that we've had Aaron Swartz Day in person since then, so I'm really excited to be back here, able to talk about a past project we did and provide updates. So as Lisa mentioned, the general idea is to focus on collecting and publishing data on police misconduct, making that data available to the public, and that's useful to journalists, citizens, and police departments. The idea is that if we can file Public Records Act requests and just take data that's already been published online by various police departments and congregate it all into one database that's very easy to search and look through, it can help journalists find statistics on police misconduct. It can help police departments vet their officers before hiring them to make sure that they don't have records that they're unaware of. Maybe they got fired for misconduct or had to resign at a different department and move to a different town over, etc. And this database and website are fully open source. Accessibility is a really big priority for us. We make sure that all of our colors have a proper contrast ratio. We have multiple translations into different languages, etc. And everything is privacy respecting. I'm going to go a lot more in depth on all of these features that Bad Apple is built upon, because it's built upon the same features that power Priveasy, but I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So to quickly go over some of our resources that we have available, we have the biggest database currently available of oversight commissions. These are independent commissions that people can search for if they feel that they've been a victim of misconduct, or they want to report some sort of activity that they've seen, or maybe they just want to get more information or records that are available for their town. They can search our database and find information all about their local oversight commission. If there is an oversight commission near you that's not currently in our database, please let us know. We would love to add it. Similarly, this is a quick overview of the Bad Apple database. In this case, you can see that I've searched for conduct as a violated policy in the state of California, and there's a whole list of officer names that will come up that summarizes the findings and allows you to see basic details and view full investigative reports. And you can scroll through the findings, view the original archives, etc. Perfect. So I'm going to save questions for the very end. Actually, I did see one hand though, so I'll let you go first. Yes.
Okay, great. Here's your question. Thank you.
Yeah, man. My question was, so is this updated live from the government's database, or do you make the request and then update it once it comes through the Freedom of Information request?
Yeah, great question. So it's not updated live. However, we do update it ourselves. It's a manual process at the moment. Unfortunately, a lot of the records that we get are extremely unique. We have some great major city police departments that provide us archives that contain everything, really well-formatted investigative reports and videos and of the incident that happened and body cam footage, all this stuff. And then we have small town police departments that provide us with very little information that is not well formatted and contains not enough data. So it's very hard to automate the process. That being said, it is updated live in the sense that if we get a tip, we can submit a PRA request, a Public Records Act request for that data, and as soon as we get it, we'll put it in the database.
Gotcha.
But yes, thank you.
There's still a little bit of manual required to format that into your
Unfortunately,
database.
yeah. We're trying to automate it as much as possible, but unfortunately, the limits of technology still prevent it from being 100% automated.
I'd say that's like an NLP task, man. Here, I'm gonna hand the mic back.
Perfect, thank you so much. All right, now I want to get into the main presentation here, which is about retrofit privacy. So this is more, instead of being a formal presentation where I'm going to go into exact specific details, instead I formatted this more like a collection of footnotes, because for some of you who have seen me talk before, or familiar with some of the projects I've worked on, I've been working on privacy and security related open source projects for many years. And over time, I've noticed that there is a very clear series of patterns related to this type of technology. So instead of going super in depth on one topic, I wanted to provide almost like a set of footnotes, a set of things that I've noticed over time while working on these projects that I think some people might not know about and would be really interesting. So that being said, there are going to be a lot of digressions and a lot of side points here. If there is something that interests you and I quickly gloss over it, at the end, please feel free to ask questions and I will happily go back through that. Awesome. So the biggest debate that I think most people see when they enter into either academia or the workforce is the idea about privacy versus security. Which one's more important? Why do we need one versus the other? In my opinion, I don't think that is the right question to ask. I see privacy as being necessary in order to have good security, and vice versa. You can't have good privacy without having good security in the first place. There's a lot of confusion in modern day security where people assume that you need to have some sort of privacy compromises in order to guarantee good security. The most common example that I see brought up all the time is logging. People say, okay, well, we need to have good logs so we can see if someone's doing a SQL injection attack against the website and then block their IP address. However, I think that that's a little bit too ambiguous. I think people are combining different ideas and assuming that they all mean security. For example, logging often has attribution associated with it, so you can go back after an event has occurred and you can identify whoever this threat actor is. But that's not the same as security. It's not the same as stopping the event in the first place. Similarly speaking, when it comes to logs, people often think that you need logs in order to, for example, detect infiltration. And that might very well be true. I'm not here to argue that logging is a bad thing, but I am here to say that logging is not identical to security because there are tools out there currently that can more or less anonymize logs. You can take out specific IP addresses from logs. You can remove specific user information while still having the fundamental data that matters. So say, yes, someone has infiltrated your internal network, it might still be important to keep logs, and it might still be important to review those logs and run security tools against them. But is it going to make a difference at the end of the day when you see a break-in that occurred, some sort of attack, who exactly orchestrated the attack? From a law enforcement perspective, maybe, but from an actual core security perspective, it's not required in order to have good security. It's not required in order to figure out what the vulnerability was. It's only required for the other aspects that people like to have, like attribution. So my argument is that if you look at these at their core, what security and privacy is at their core, they actually combine really well together, and it's really hard to have one without having another. And that's something that I hope to demonstrate a bit more as we go through some examples here. So why isn't privacy at the forefront of developers' minds? Because security is something that is really touted, especially the past decade. But privacy isn't something that you see as much at the forefront of modern day software development. And I think that really comes down to historical precedents. If you're someone like me who's spent a lot of time reading through way too many standards from the tech community, such as RFCs, requests for comment, this is a pattern that I've noticed. I'm not gonna lie, I've never seen a specific outline like this on like the IETF's website, but just from personal experience, I can tell you that this is almost exactly how it goes every time. So first, when people try to make a standard in technology, they try to adopt a new technology, no-brainer, you're first gonna care about functionality. Does this technology actually work before we can make it a standard? The next thing is backwards compatibility. That is something that I think is really, really harmful. And it's the main reason why we haven't had major security and I guess privacy, since they're bundled together, breakthroughs like I would like to see. The reason is because these standards are really focused on making sure that technologies are completely backwards compatible. I would love to see a future in which we get to almost like a semantic versioning on the internet where it's like, great, we're gonna provide long-term support for this standard for 10 years, but after 10 years, we need all of these devices to be updated in order to stay on the latest version of the internet. It's an ideal for privacy and security, but I do think that it's something that is really important to consider. But as it is, that's not currently the case. You can fire up a computer from the 90s, and it's going to still be able to connect to Google and make a Google search without any issues today, just like it would have back then. And that has some issues with it. Let's talk about efficiency as well. Efficiency is also a big concern. It's one of the main concerns, but I think it's often overhyped. So you have something like backwards compatibility, for example. If you've ever taken a basic networking class, you've ever read through an introduction to networking textbook, you're going to see a lot of stuff in there that doesn't make sense unless you know the historical context. Like, you're going to look at DHCP and be like, why the heck is there a magic number here? What does that have to do with? But if you know the historical context, or it's based off of boot P, it now starts to make sense why they had to include it. And efficiency is often overhyped as well, because the reality is we can, in a sense, rebuild the wheel and do it in a way that is technically less efficient on paper, but has no realistic impact on the modern world in terms of efficiency, yet the privacy and security improvements would be incredible. For example, what if we redefined Ethernet, and now we had, instead of a MAC address, you have a public key, and then all data is encrypted by default across Ethernet? Sure, that would be less efficient, but as it currently stands, we have separate NICs, network interface cards, and sure, there are some system on chips and integration, but ideally you can have a separate processor, so it's not going to slow down your actual system or speeds. And fiber optics is nowhere near its limit yet. You see new records every day where scientists are sending a petabyte of information in a second and reaching these crazy speeds over fiber optics. So I don't think we're anywhere near having to worry about these minute efficiency details in modern day technologies, and I think the payoff for privacy would be incredible. Another small digression as well is, think about modern examples. People hear me say rebuild the wheel, and they're like, no, that's something that's like a common phrase, is not to try and redesign something that's already been built and works well. I beg to differ. The reality is, when the internet and these early standards were being created, security was not in the forefront of people's minds. If you look at modern systems that have rebuilt the wheel, they've done incredible things and have worked very well. Look at Rust. Rust is an amazing programming language, and it can guarantee memory safety and removes a whole bunch of caveats and issues with, like C, for example, where now you're required to handle exceptions and edge cases, and there are no null values, etc. And I think that people get this idea in their heads that everything has to be done perfectly and everything has to be orderly. But the reality is, if we did have some sort of semantic versioning for the internet, some sort of give and take for efficiency versus privacy and security, I think it would make the internet a much better place. And then finally, security comes as an afterthought. This is generally the precedent I've seen. First, focus on functionality, make sure it's backwards compatible, improve efficiency where you can before making it a standard, and then security comes as an afterthought. We've seen this with DNS, where you first had DNS, and then you had DNSSEC, which cared about integrity and authentication, but it doesn't really care so much about privacy or security. It has some aspects of security. It's better, security as an afterthought, but it does not carry the full encryption that we then saw even later with DNS over TLS and DNS over HTTPS. And the same pattern happens all the time with various technologies. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is the unintentional theme of the past decade truly has been retrofitting privacy. And here are some great examples where I can talk about privacy being retrofitted, but only because security was the priority. So I was originally going to go through each and every one of these, but I'm short on time. So I'm just gonna say that at the end, if you have questions about any specific one, I'd be happy to go into more details. But essentially, these are all things that have become standards because security was an important issue, but later these technologies were super useful for helping to ensure user privacy. Cool. So now privacy, at least in its current state, is treated more like a feature. Because we have this mindset where privacy and security are more of an afterthought instead of being the default like they should be, companies that do implement privacy features tend to advertise them, like I just said, as a feature. And there's a problem with that, because there's a very big difference between having privacy be a default, well-accepted standard and having privacy be a feature that a company tries to promote. Because when a big company implements this as a feature instead of the community coming together and having these standards, they don't tend to do it in the way that they want you to think they do it. For example, again, I'm not going to go through all of these because I'm a little short on time, but I do want to bring up a couple examples. I'm someone who's done a lot of work in the open source community. I've developed a lot of security tools, including VPNs, and I feel like every single year there's some big press release that comes out, some privacy researchers put out a report saying, oh my goodness, their VPNs on Apple devices aren't working. Apple still connects back to its servers, not using a VPN profile. I can tell you as a developer who's worked with VPNs, this has been the case forever. As long as I can remember, VPNs have always had exceptions built into where, Apple's still going to connect to its servers to provide you with notifications, and Apple still wants you to be able to contribute to their Find My network, even if your VPN connection isn't working. So unfortunately, they might advertise the ability to lock down your device with profiles, but big companies, when these privacy features are left in their hands instead of being made a privacy default in a privacy standard, they tend to be implemented in their favor. Similarly, you'll see a feature advertised like full disk encryption. And the reality is, when you set up full disk encryption, what does it do on every device? It's going to ask you, hey, would you like to save your encryption key? And that way there, if you somehow get locked out of your device, you switch your hard drive to a new computer, you can recover it using your account credentials, whether that's Apple or Microsoft. And is it really worth having full disk encryption? Or at least, is it really as secure as they want you to think if they're still holding on to the decryption key? Just stuff to think about. And I do want to mention as well, the VPN stuff also applies to Android devices. I just picked Apple as the boogeyman in this case. So now the stage has been set, I want to quickly go through some story time, and I want to make it clear how much privacy truly has been retrofitted, because a lot of the presenters today have had to do the same thing I've had to do. So I'm someone who's created privacy services, and I have to try and find the balance between realistically what can be done and what I've actually, and what my ideals are for what I actually want to be able to do. And so you'll see compromises by a whole bunch of projects, like, maybe we care about, surveillance technologies, or maybe we care about anonymizing our users, or maybe we care about whatever it happens to be. But then at the same time, you don't have the resources to build an entire system for, like you might have to use Google Docs or Google Forms because you don't have the resources to build an entire private system to handle that. Or you might have to use some other big company's technology like Amazon's AWS because you can't set up your own servers. It's almost impossible to do it all. So every modern project has to make a compromise somewhere between how much privacy they want to enforce, but then how much they can realistically enforce. So anyways, this is a bit of a story about me, who came into this as an idealist, wanting to build privacy technologies that truly were private through and through, and just how many compromises I had to make in a lot of ways that people might not think about. So we're gonna keep this super short. In high school, that was kind of when I started building my mainstream privacy technologies. It started by just building a VPN service. I used basic scripts, open source, you could find on the internet, trail of bits. There are algo VPN scripts, set up my own VPN server. And what do you know? I have a whole bunch of other students at my school that really want to use a VPN. I was doing it because I had idealized privacy ideas. They were doing it probably because they wanted to be able to browse Instagram while on the school Wi-Fi. But at the end of the day, they were still using the VPN. And that's really what got me started in wanting to build and publish mainstream privacy tools. The reality was I did it at cost. It was like, I don't know, maybe $5 a month for the VPS times 2 or 3 dozen users. There were some more costs because I had multiple servers at one point, but it was only like 35 cents a month. And I wasn't super strict about enforcing it, so there are probably still a lot of students out there who owe me 35 cents, but it is what it is. But yeah, so I gained dozens of users. I could not keep up. I couldn't keep up with trying to get those payments or trying to update the users list. It was a very manual process. So that's when Priveasy was conceived. I decided, hey, what the heck? Why not just build this into an automated tool, and then I can help even more people. I can start my own VPN service, and I can offer this up to anybody who wants it, and I can do it at cost because it was ridiculously cheap. I'm not going to read through that whole thing. That was a trimmed down version of the goal for Priveasy on the original website. I'm not going to read through that all. I've learned a lot more about web design since I posted that very long thing on there. But at the end of the day, my goal was to create as many open source privacy tools and services as possible and make them available at cost for as many people as I could. So I thought this was going to be super easy. I was like, great, I need to research a web application framework and learn it super well so I can build a nice website. Then I just need to pick a database to store information, maybe pick a reverse proxy. Nginx sounds great. And then some firewall rules. Uncomplicated firewall, great, easy. I thought this was going to be very simple. Turns out it wasn't. It was not simple at all. The reality is, as someone who wanted to make privacy tools, I didn't feel comfortable having to compromise my users' privacy in order to then serve them those tools. And so I ended up having this development process that was extremely recursive. So essentially, I'd research one thing, and then I'd find a rabbit hole that says, oh, but in order to provide this service, you're going to have to also provide this service, because if you don't, then your user's privacy is going to be compromised because you're going to have to use some other standard that isn't very private. And it ended up causing this extremely recursive development process that took me a very long time to get through. So yeah, as I said, I wanted to keep my promise of ensuring every user's privacy. And so I just want to walk through what some of these things are that I've encountered, some of the gotchas that I found, because I think some of these will seem pretty crazy or ridiculous. If you're a privacy conscious person, a security person, you're not going to be surprised by any of these. But I think most people don't realize just how many ways there are to be tracked on the internet. And I will say, having worked on the Bad Apple project, it's super important for us to ensure user privacy, and we do that in a lot of ways. We understand that if we were to ever get hacked and we had logs of people visiting our site or submitting tips, retribution is a real thing. If people are submitting a tip about police misconduct or some form of abuse, it's something really scary, and we need to make sure that we can virtually guarantee their privacy. And so that's something that is really important. And so I've seen a lot of other services that do something similar. Like you'll have a town that will post its, let you search up officers' records or something. And I haven't seen any at the national level, but at local levels. And they often overlook a lot of the things I'm about to list, not intentionally, simply because they don't have the full technical background to build it themselves, so they use third-party tools that often violate privacy. So first, great, I want to design a website. Where do I start? Well, I need to first design the website. I need to write the HTML and CSS and JavaScript and make it happen. Great. Let's use Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a framework to make design of websites super easy, straightforward, simple. And, well, when you try to look at a lot of guides and textbooks online for using Bootstrap, a lot of times they tend to promote not hosting the raw CSS yourself on your own servers. The reason they say this is, oh, well, Bootstrap gets updated all the time, so you always want to have the latest version in case there are any bugs. But here's the reality is when people visit your website, if you're not hosting the CSS yourself and you link to a third-party site, well, now their computer's making a request to that third-party service, and there's often going to be a referrer in there or something that can identify where they're coming from. But even if not, I don't want someone, as I said, I was trying to make no privacy compromises, so I didn't want someone to come to my site looking for privacy services and all of a sudden have their computer reaching out to Google or some S3 bucket to grab a version of Bootstrap in the background without them ever even knowing from someone else's site and leaving logs on their servers. It just didn't make sense to me. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'll just have to download and consistently update Bootstrap. Oh, great, custom fonts, same thing. I promise you, if there is a service out there for free, I promise you, you are the product. I know you've heard this before, but Google does some amazing things to make development work easier. They provide this amazing font library, Google Fonts. They're not doing it for free because they love you and want the internet to look pretty. They're doing it for free because your computer, when you use a custom font on your website, reaches out to their servers to grab those files, and Google now tracks your users. This is something that is very, very, very often overlooked and is a simple reality of the web. And it's kind of sad, but it's how it works. It's the same thing if you add like a Facebook like button or like a, I don't know, Twitter share button, whatever it is. Anytime you add any sort of social media links, embedded widgets, like, oh, I'd love users to share my content. Again, these social media platforms don't have these buttons to make it easier for your users to share their content. They're doing it to get their code on your site, so your users then reach out to their servers in the background without them ever knowing, but their computers contact their servers so they can now track your users. Cool. All right, so great. I'll just have to use custom fonts, or if I use custom fonts, I'll have to download them and host them myself. Now, how will I accept payments? Because as much as I've given away a lot of this stuff for free, the reality is I also, need to help cover the server costs. I can't provide all the accounts for free. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll start using Stripe. Well, if you use Stripe, the payment card industry is ridiculously strict. I'm not saying it's unwarranted, but it's very strict. And so you have to embed either their custom JavaScript on your website, or you need to redirect them to Stripe's website in order to pay. And Stripe has all of your information, so they know exactly who your users are and all of their contact details, and they also know who you are. So it's very easy for them to attribute your users to your website. So I solved this in 2 ways. First, I knew that, and I'm going to have to speed up quite a bit here. But to quickly go through, I built a, cool. So I built a library that was a wraparound Zcash, and it allowed people to use Zcash with a Python backend, because I was using Django for my web server. So essentially allowed accepting private transactions, including not using transparent addresses, using shielded addresses, which is really important in Zcash. And I published that, made it free for anyone to use. But I did still allow Stripe, but I basically had a giant warning that said, okay, I understand that I'll be loading content from Stripe's website, and you click proceed in order to pay if you still wanted to pay via credit card. I'm going to have to go a little bit quicker, but essentially with logs and full disk encryption and Shred and Tor, my concern was, what about users' logs on my web server? I need to keep those safe. So A, I need full disk encryption on the server from the very beginning if logs are going to be written to the server, which they are on all servers by default. I need to set up a program that can automatically wipe these logs, and I don't mean delete or unlink or remove. I mean write over the actual bits on the disk with randomized data. And so I had to write a program for that. I used log rotate, but a customized version. All of this is published online. You can find these tools that I've written. Similarly, for Tor, Django does not like Tor. It does not work by default. There are lots of issues. If you try to add any sort of custom headers, Django's going to have issues. If you enforce, for example, HTTPS, but Tor doesn't really need HTTPS because it's already end-to-end encrypted, Django's not going to let you serve a website over Tor because Tor looks like an unencrypted connection, and Django cares about security. So I had to write a custom, essentially, I had to rewrite one of the files in Django, and I made that publicly available. Going quicker. Okay, great. Now where should I host the website database? This is another problem. I can't just put in AWS because now Amazon's tracking all my users. I can't just use Google Cloud. One of the things you saw on the earlier slide is they claim they have a secure private cloud. But the reality is, whether or not they make it publicly known, you're still using their servers and they're still tracking the content leaving and exiting their servers. So I ended up going with Greenhost. Unfortunately, I don't have more time to get more in depth, but it's a difficult decision to find a good privacy-respecting hosting provider, especially one that will allow Tor traffic and doesn't give you any issues about that, and Greenhost has been absolutely amazing. Great. How do they get to my web server? Well, here's an issue. Whenever you want to look up a website, you are making a DNS request. The simple reality is that computers don't like human-readable garbage. To them, typing in Bad Apple or Priveasy.org, whatever it happens to be, makes no sense. They need a way to actually get to that site, a routable way to get there. And so they use DNS. So essentially, I was like, okay, well, there are no privacy-respecting DNS services out there. I'm going to have to host my own DNS server. And it's not perfect, but it's better. There are modern things, again, retrofitting privacy in the standards. We went from DNS, DNSSEC, DNS over TLS, but there's also DNS query name minimization, which meant that hosting my own DNS servers actually would have somewhat of an effect, but not in all cases. But it was better than nothing. All right, and I'm going to have to go much quicker through these, but how can I prove to my users I'm actually keeping their promises? This is the most important and most popular tool that I built, and essentially it's infrastructure as code. It's like Ansible or Puppet, but it's actually simple, straightforward, written in Bash, super efficient, super customizable. It's really easy to use, and it allows you to prove that what you store in a Git repository publicly translates exactly to what's running on your servers. So it allows your users to not only see the open source content on your servers, but exactly how they were set up, and essentially be able to prove to them that you are doing exactly what you say on your servers and maintaining your promises. It's called Fetch Apply. It's amazing. Okay. I set up, super short, I set up my own CAPTCHA service that allows users to generate their own CAPTCHAs so that they can't spam database. Dealing with user account data, I thought, okay, well, why am I accepting usernames and passwords and using a default authentication backend that asks for personal details? So instead, I switched to a custom one that instead just uses a simple token and doesn't require any user data. So eventually, after going through this long recursive process, I created Priveasy, provided these amazing services: VPN, URL shortener, burner emails, burner text messaging, private pastebin, etc. And I did it for the most part for free. My rule was, hey, it's really cheap at cost, but if you can't pay, just send me an email and I'll just give you an account for free. It was really great and an amazing learning experience. Going through this whole recursive process, I learned so much about internet technology and gained some amazing information. The problem was it wasn't sustainable. I had all of these amazing things that I did here. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but essentially I expanded and did some incredible things like database sharding, which is extremely difficult, especially if you're trying to do it open source. And I really stuck to my privacy principles. The problem is big companies followed suit. Soon I had email forwarding where you could use a randomized email address when you're signing up to different websites. So each website had a random address, and you knew if a website sold your data because it was an email from a different website linked to that randomized address, and a whole bunch of features that you now see built into, for example, Apple's iCloud services, where they have these built-in VPNs and email randomization, et cetera. So unfortunately, this model wasn't sustainable. I couldn't, with giving out the free accounts, which it's unfortunate because I still get requests all the time for free VPN accounts, especially users from Iran right now, because I had pluggable transports, which allow you to bypass a lot of countrywide filters as well, built into my VPN. I still get users all the time asking for free connections, but unfortunately, this model wasn't sustainable, and so I had to stop providing those services. But then I realized, and here's the end, so I promise I am almost done. Then I realized that these end services I was providing were not the most valuable thing, because you can get, I mean, when I first created VPNs, there weren't services like Proton VPN or Molvad, which are generally better VPN services. They didn't exist at the time, but now there are pretty good alternatives to the services that I was providing. They don't have necessarily the same level of proofs as I did, showing that how private they are and how committed to open source technology they are, but they're pretty good. And so I realized that I can't compete with these giant companies, but that wasn't the most important thing that I had created. It was all these little supporting projects along the way that I had built, all these tools that were the most important thing. It was creating the private DNS. Currently, there is no private DNS hosting provider, not that I have personally seen. There's no DNS host, like there are providers that claim they're private. You'll see that with Cloudflare, but can they prove it? Not really. I haven't seen any definitive proof that they're private and aren't tracking DNS requests. Similarly, there's no private CAPTCHA services. And I'm a really big believer in self-hosting stuff. I've created self-hosting CAPTCHAs. And I also am really afraid about how the internet is becoming more and more accessible for people who subscribe to giant companies and less available to people who care about open source technologies. And you see something like the agreement between Apple and Cloudflare, where now if you have an Apple device, you're not going to see CAPTCHAs on the internet anymore. If you don't, sorry, you now have to fill out CAPTCHAs all the time. And having a CAPTCHA service that can actually prove the privacy is super important, something I don't see currently available. Similar server management and configuration with Fetch Apply, the program I created. I want to make that more widely available, improve upon it, and include a modules library, built-in plugins that, well, not built-in, but plugins that you can copy and download to configure all different types of servers to make it a breeze and as easy as possible. Overlay network. I don't have time to get into that, unfortunately, but essentially there are a lot of issues. Tor is amazing, but there are a lot of issues with it that are, unfortunately, based on the current design, unavoidable. Like, there are big denial of service issues with Tor at the moment. And something I've been working on for a couple of years now has been something heavily based on Tor and taking inspiration from services like WireGuard and Zcash with their zero-knowledge proofs, but fixes a lot of these issues and makes Tor even more robust and privacy-friendly. But that, you won't see that for a couple of years. So anyways, Priveasy is going to be reborn. Right now, our site is, you can't sign up. If you go on there, you will see that you can get through generating an account, but then I won't accept payment at the moment. And the reason is because right now it's only available to sign in for legacy users, users who still had active VPN connections, active URL shorteners, or shortened URLs, etc. But soon, all those accounts will expire because I force all accounts to be ephemeral because I don't want to hold on to any user information for longer than necessary. So the limit is a 6-month length account because they're just randomly generated access tokens. And those are about to expire soon, and I'm going to be relaunching Priveasy, except focusing on presenting and providing all of these fundamental services to allow other developers to build their websites privately. And not just developers, but anyone to build a website more privately. So that's my goal. If you check our GitHub, you're going to see it's wildly outdated. I have not updated that in about 6 months, and that's because we now use Git-T, and it will be available, launched with all these amazing new features in 2 weeks. I was hoping to have it ready by today, but it is not. It is not ready by today. I've been so overwhelmed. But in 2 weeks, it will be available, and the beta testing for Priveasy will also be available. And just as before, I'm going to be providing all these services at cost. But if you can't afford to pay, just send me an email, and I'll just create you a free account. And if you're interested in beta testing, send an email to admin@priveasy.org. I will happily get you on the list and reach out to you when we're ready. But yeah, so if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. I had to skip over a lot of stuff, so I can definitely go way more in detail about anything specific if there happen to be any questions.
Here's a question from Booster.
Fantastic, completely.
Thank you.
Really impressive. So, yay! So, the Internet Archive tried to solve one of those puzzles differently than the way you did, which is what to do with IP addresses in weblogs. And we have a rotating hash, and we've changed our Nginx to basically not write IP addresses. And it works quite well. Then there's the Google Analytics problem, which we, instead of putting a web bug on the on the page that people we relay it back through the server. And that seems to help because people really want Google Analytics. They're changing Google Analytics, so I'm not sure this is going to live for that much longer, but it's been a good hack. On the DNS, is that still alive? Do you have a privacy-oriented solid DNS?
I will in a few weeks. So at the moment, it's paused. Right now, is it functional? Yes. Do I use it for our current services like Priveasy and Bad Apple websites? Yes, but it is not publicly available because I'm still considering it in beta. I want to have maybe anywhere from a few dozen to a couple hundred users use it for many months in a row without a single blip before I promise that it is publicly available. But it is functional, yes.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Great work.
Thank you. But yeah, no, that was really interesting, and I think the logging issue is definitely a concern. In Google Analytics, the approach I've always taken is to focus more on statistics rather than analytics. So in my mind, analytics is acquiring statistics and all these separate data points, but then merging them together to create an image of your users. And I don't have a personal problem with collecting statistics, so just looking at exactly how many times a page was visited, fine by me. Google Analytics takes things a step further. If you've ever used like Google CAPTCHAs, fun fact, they don't care whether or not you click on a bridge or not. If you can click all the wrong images, and if you are signed into your Google account, for example, it's gonna let you through no matter what. They just use those to train their AIs for image recognition and use you as free resources. They actually use JavaScript to track your mouse movements across the page and look at your browsing history because you're signed into your Google account so they can tell if it looks like a bot or if you actually have browsing history. Google Analytics is aggregating all of this data. So, for example, you might not be signed into your Google account currently, but they know that the person who normally is signed into your Google account visits the same website that has their Google font installed at the same time every day, and then you go to a site, and then you're on a new computer, but you still visit that same website the same time every day, and now you have a CAPTCHA, well, they're probably gonna let you pass because they might not know that you're a Google user and that you're legitimate, but they can still see that browsing history. And so that's how their CAPTCHA system works. So analytics is very similar in that they don't actually, their correlation isn't so much statistic based on how traffic happens on your actual site. They're more gearing towards correlation between traffic on your site versus traffic on other sites, and that's how they can build profiles on like your gender and age and all this extra information. So anyways, personally when it comes to Google Analytics, I tend to prefer a statistics approach, which only focuses on exactly how many times like pages on my website were loaded. So I guess what I'd say is I would recommend moving away from Google Analytics because I could talk about this for a very long time, but they're essentially using you to help them track users for other people because they also are looking at people visiting your site and then aggregating that information to provide analytics for other people as well. And there are a lot of ways that they exploit users. So just something to think about. But yeah, that is really interesting with Google Analytics and something really interesting with logging. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. So we have struggled with similar issues in SecureDrop because one of the challenges we have is we try to get news orgs to advertise the Onion URL of their page so sources can visit it. But of course, the visitors to the ClearNet URL that will then visit the Onion address is like a great candidate for who the sources are, right? So we're often trying to provide kind of similar guidelines to how do you configure this page, this web page, in a private and secure manner. But unlike what you're describing, this is a site that's hosted on, it'll be like New York Times /source or whatever, right? So it's kind of using their existing infrastructure. So my question is about kind of like theory versus practice and compromises that you've had to make for organizations that do not self-host and that do not have this level of fine-grained control. For example, we've had a lot of the same guidelines of like no trackers, no third-party resources, no this, no that. But when it comes to like no cookies, a lot of the time, like your CDN will set cookies and stuff. So have you gone down the rabbit hole for privacy on websites that you aren't fully self-hosting when you're dealing with third-party platforms and kind of dealing with CDNs and stuff? Do you have any privacy tips there? And thanks for your talk.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great question. Thank you. It is a really difficult situation. As you mentioned, using, especially if you don't have a separate custom domain, if you're using some sort of path, that can be really difficult because as you mentioned, cookies, they care about domain. They don't really tend to care about path and domain, subdomain, et cetera. But not only that, it also makes it hard because when you have Tor and you're using like a v3 onion address, somewhat recently Tor started asking for people to start using onion location headers so that you can automatically redirect people from plain, I guess, standard sites to onion addresses. So there are a lot of features, including privacy features of Tor that simply aren't accessible if you don't have that domain level control. So what I would say is that if you're using any sort of third-party provider to host a website, I don't think that you can quite reach the same level of privacy. And there's a reason that a lot of sites that use that care about privacy, for example, CryptPad. I absolutely love CryptPad. Uses it's amazing. It's like Google Docs, except actually private. And they require the use of 2 separate custom domains just to run that site because they want to have separate domains that they can force the separation of cookies for like authentication and like in the encryption versus the actual content that's hosted on the site. So long story short, I think that it's a really important question to raise, but unfortunately I don't know of any good solutions other than using privacy respecting resources whenever possible. So like if a third party is hosting your website or using some sort of content delivery network or whatever it happens to be that isn't controlled by you, there's no way to guarantee that privacy aspect. But if you need a CAPTCHA and you use, for example, the CAPTCHA that I'm going to be making public soon, each individual step you take where you're not using one of these giant companies that tracks all their users is a step in the right direction, but I do completely sympathize with your concern there because I don't know of a perfect solution for that. Thank you.
Cool. I wanted to make a couple points that you made just to make sure that I got it right, because it's kind of incredible, some of the things that you said in this talk, to be honest. Okay, number one. So Google fonts are basically operating as tracking beacons. Yes?
Yeah, anytime you have any free service provided by any third party, you can assume that that party is tracking your users in some way. Either if it's something as simple as just innocent logs on their website, most servers aren't configured to wipe, literally shred logs. So in some way, if your users, when visiting your site, have to reach out to any third party at all, you can almost guarantee that they're leaving a footprint there. So I'm not gonna claim, I don't work for Google, I'm not gonna make the claim that that is their intention with Google Fonts, but it is definitely a side effect of using Google Fonts. And so you should instead download the Google Fonts and then host them yourself, as long as they have some sort of license that allows it, which I believe they all do, but don't hold me to that. You can host them yourself and still get those fonts without using the default configuration that Google recommends.
Okay, great. So there is a fix for it, and it's a little more work, but not that much really, and you just have to know that you need to do it. Because it's so easy when you're in a hurry and you're just like, oh, wow, that worked. Now it's like the default, and it's not good. Okay, cool. Google Analytics. Google is basically, if you use Google Analytics on your website, Google is basically tracking everyone on your website.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, just wanted to make that clear. And that's probably why it's free, because you made that other point too. A lot of these free services, it's usually for some reason. They're sort of selling the information probably after they collect it in some way.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that Django can work over Tor.
Yes.
If you have this custom code that you wrote to deal with the issues that it would have normally.
So,
and is that how we didn't we use Django for Bad Apple?
Yes, we do. Quick note on that. So the main issue is just that by default, you can't get, on 99% of the time, you can't get an SSL certificate for an onion address. So if you're someone like me who's using Let's Encrypt for your websites, Let's Encrypt currently does not support onion addresses. And because you can't get your v3 onion address, or just any onion address, in the actual certificate that gets issued to you, then Django has issues because you have HTTPS only in your security settings, but then Django looks at the Tor connection as if it's not secure, so it's going to not allow any of that traffic through. So I basically had to write a plugin that says, hey, so we're gonna add an exception for Tor services or onion services.
Okay, cool. And all of these tools that you're talking about are going to be available on the Git that you're going to launch in a couple weeks?
Yes, so all of them are currently available at github.com/p5vc. I own the domain p5.vc. It kind of sounds like Priveasy if you say it slowly. And so they're all currently available there, but they are a few months out of date because I've really been putting all my energy onto this relaunch and using Git and just keeping everything self-hosted as much as possible. So, for example, fetch apply, there are major changes, major rewrites that'll be posted. They're already done. They'll be posted on the Git soon. And even like our current backends, like Bad Apple, will be posted, rewritten to conform more to some coding standards that I might personally take issue with, but in reality, to make things easier and more interoperable, should be adhered to.
Okay, great. And I just want to let everybody know that we will be posting Noah's whole talk online, and along with direct links to all of these tools that he mentioned today, so that everyone can find them easy when they want to, and that you can always write Noah at admin@priveasy.org, and he writes back. He answers questions, he gives you the answer, and he's just sort of a wonderful all-around human being. So I'm really excited that he was able to give this talk, and I want to make sure that everybody knows that we'll be having a whole Noah's talk kind of section on the Aaron Swartz Day website very soon.
Yay, thank you so much. Yeah, I want to reaffirm that. Please send me as much as you want, admin@priveasy.org or admin@badapple.tools or info@badapple.tools. I'll respond to anything for the most part, any sort of questions you might have, any suggestions. And then I also want to quickly mention, since we heard from Secure Drop, I saw during their presentation, they mentioned CubesOS. I did not have time to get into all of this lower level stuff in my talk, but just a quick plug for CubesOS. If you're a developer or you care about privacy or security, it makes secure, it's a secure operating system that is insanely easy to use and absolutely amazing. And if you're a developer, you can spin up a disposable VM and make as many breaking changes as you want and press a button and it's just gone. It's amazing. And then use heads to verify your firmware on your device. That's also important. But yes, thank you very much.